I'm gonna show you the very best pizza dough and why it's so simple. Pizza's supposed to be simple. It's essentially a bread dough, water, flour, yeast, salt, that's it. It's just about the technique. It's not about fancy ingredients and complicated recipes. Scaling out your ingredients as opposed to using a measuring cup is the best way to make sure it's accurate. Using cups, you're never really gonna be as accurate as weighing the recipe. So this recipe is 500 grams of 00 flour. If you can't find 00 flour, use a strong baker's bread flour. They develop the best gluten as opposed to all-purpose or pastry flour. Pastry flour is milled at a much finer density than bread flour and 00. 00's got a bit more protein in it, I believe. Okay, so 500 and then 360 grams of water. Grams and milliliters are 1 gram to 1 milliliter, so you can kind of eyeball it out to 360 and then just use the scale. 1 teaspoon of yeast, and we're just gonna bloom the yeast in the water for about 5 minutes. And then once the yeast is bloomed, we'll start mixing and add the salt. Okay, you can kind of see the yeast is starting to foam a little bit, and you can see the kind of granules, they're actually starting to dissolve and look murky. That's what you want. If we were to wait, say 20 minutes, it would actually really start to foam as the yeast starts to eat the natural sugars in the flour. And this is because I'm using active dry yeast. If you're using a fresh yeast or an instant yeast, which is more powdery, you don't need to let it bloom. You can actually just mix it right away, but this is the kind of yeast I have at the moment, so this is what we're doing. All right, into the mixer. You can do this by hand if you wanted. This dough is a 70% hydration, so it's a little stickier, but it's easier to stretch when it's a higher hydration. So I'm gonna opt for the mixer, and we're gonna mix it at the speed number 2 for about 5 minutes, and I'm gonna add salt while it starts mixing. All right, so we're gonna transfer it to another bowl, just because I wanna spray it with a bit of olive oil so it doesn't stick to the sides. Right now it's sticking to the sides. I did mention it was a bit of a stickier dough. You can use a spatula or a dough scraper, doesn't really matter. And just transfer it to the oiled bowl. So from here, what we want to do is we want to ferment the dough. So we're going to cover it, and while it's fermenting, it's going to rise. And then from there, we're going to portion it into dough balls. And for the best flavor, I recommend proofing it in the fridge overnight. But if you want to use it the same day, just proof it for about an hour for the individual dough balls to rise, and then take it to your oven. So the reason for fermenting it in the fridge overnight, the slower fermentation allows for more flavor to develop, but the cold temperature of the fridge will allow it to slow the rising. So it won't overproof, but it'll still develop more flavor the longer period of time that you're proofing it. Okay, so we want to make this into a more uniform ball, and it is a stickier dough. So little chef's tip here, dip your hands in some water and it won't stick. If I don't do that, the dough will stick to my hand. So just very gently make it into a uniform sized ball. We're gonna cover it, use plastic wrap or shower cap, and let that rise probably about a half an hour to an hour. Then we'll portion it into individual pizza dough balls and rest it in the fridge overnight.
1 hour later.
Pizza time. Our dough has risen, almost doubled in size. You can see it's visibly kind of wobbly because it's now got air inside. Start with some flour. Just dust the top, dust your work surface. Flip out your dough. You see all the air bubbles in it? Just want to fold it over onto itself. More flour. And we're just kind of knocking some of the air out, and just by shaping it with this dough scraper, I'm forming it into a ball. The bottom is sort of sticking a little bit. It's actually allowing me to make it a little tighter. Now you can just simply cut it into 6 equal portions, or if you really want to get specific, you can weigh it and divide it by 6. 870 divided by 6. So we're going to do 6 portions of 145 grams. So from here, we're gonna make our dough balls. A little bit of flour, and the trick is to push down while you're kind of squeezing. And then just oil plastic container. And we'll put the lid on and let these proof. Again, I like to do this overnight because I find it helps develop flavor. It's also easier to work with and stretch dough when it's cold. It's not as sticky. But the main thing is for flavor. So you can either do this and proof it for an hour before you use it, but I like to do it overnight in the fridge. Tight fitting lid, and good night. Our dough has been resting in the fridge overnight. Now it's time to shape it. I like to shape it by hand as opposed to using a rolling pin. So make sure you got lots of flour to handle it. I like to shape the crust, the ridge, with your thumbs, and let gravity kind of stretch the dough for you. You can use the backs of your hands, use your knuckles, physically stretch it, or just again use gravity. Keep turning it, holding on to that ridge to make the crust. Sometimes you'll notice some spots will stretch more than others. So you can use your hands and knuckles and stretch it the way you want. This is the true art of pizza, is the dough and shaping. So you want to add some semolina to your pizza peel. Your dough will slide off nicely. And then I'm making the classic Margherita pizza, just crushed tomatoes and mozzarella cheese and fresh basil, garnished with a little olive oil and salt. Do a little shake, make sure it's loose, it's not sticking to your peel. My oven is 750. With one swoop, add it to your oven. So after 30 seconds or so, just want to make sure it's not completely burning. And after about a minute, you want to give it a turn. So you want to keep just kind of peeking at the bottom to make sure it's not overly burning. Little blister black spots are actually kind of good in what you're looking for. You just don't want any deep, dark, black burnt spots. I can see the tomato sauce on the top starting to bubble. The cheese is melting. It's looking like a good pie. All right, there we have it. Classic Margherita pizza. We're gonna garnish this with fresh basil, a little olive oil. And that is fresh Margherita pizza. All right, thanks for watching my pizza demo. This is how you make super simple Margherita pizza on the Breeo fire pit with the Breeo oven.